The rain hammered the office windows as Ethan sat alone at his desk, staring at the email that shattered his trust. His hands trembled as he whispered, "How could Daniel do this to me?" The betrayal was undeniable, written in words that burned into his mind. A file he had worked on for months had been presented by Daniel as his own. Every line, every calculation, stolen. Ethan's chest tightened as the realization struck harder than any storm outside. His career, his reputation, all hanging by a thread. Sarah, his trusted colleague, entered, but her eyes carried guilt instead of comfort. She avoided his gaze as if she knew. Ethan's voice broke. "He took everything I built." The office seemed darker, colder, as if the fluorescent lights mocked him. His heart pounded as Daniel's smug face flashed in memory, the smile that once looked friendly now, a knife twisted deep. Ethan clenched his fists, feeling rage coil beneath the pain. The betrayal was no accident. It was war, declared in silence. And Ethan was no longer the quiet, trusting man. Morning arrived, but Ethan carried no rest, only the heaviness of betrayal. He walked into the office where whispers clung to the walls like smoke. Daniel stood confidently at the center, colleagues circling him like moths around flame. Ethan clenched his jaw as laughter echoed, his stolen work praised as genius. "Brilliant, Daniel," someone cheered, and Ethan's stomach twisted. He wanted to scream, but silence was the weapon that kept his rage hidden. He noticed Sarah again, standing in the corner, torn between loyalty and fear. Her eyes met his for an instant before darting away. Ethan forced himself to smile faintly, masking fury under a calm mask. He muttered, "You think this is over, Daniel. But you have no idea what you've started." His words vanished beneath the buzz of celebration. The office smelled of coffee and deceit, and Ethan knew the storm inside him was only just beginning. Ethan retreated to the break room, gripping the counter as the buzz of Daniel's triumph rang in his ears. The hum of the vending machine mocked his silence. Sarah walked in quietly, closing the door behind her. "I didn't want it to happen this way," she said, her voice trembling. Ethan turned, his eyes sharp. "You knew," he whispered. She faltered, unable to deny it. The weight of her silence told him everything. The betrayal was not Daniel's alone. It was hers too, her choice to stay quiet. Rage and heartbreak blended into one heavy stone in his chest. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Every empire built on lies crumbles, Sarah. Remember that." She looked at him with a mixture of guilt and fear, unable to respond. The break room lights buzzed overhead, shadows cutting across Ethan's face like scars waiting to form. That night, Ethan sat at home, staring at his wall of notes and drafts, each page a reminder of what Daniel had stolen. He pinned them furiously, connecting lines with red string. His living room looked like the den of a man preparing for war. Empty coffee cups and scattered papers littered the floor. He spoke aloud to the empty room. "If Daniel wants a game, I'll show him how it's played." His voice shook with rage but steadied with determination. He remembered his father's words, long ago. "The knife that stabs your back sharpens your will." Ethan felt the truth of it now more than ever. Every betrayal had carved away weakness, leaving steel behind. The clock ticked past midnight, but his eyes refused sleep. Instead, fire burned within, igniting the start of something unstoppable. The next morning, Ethan arrived early, the office still quiet, air heavy with the scent of rain-soaked carpets. He sat at his desk, fingers drumming as he rehearsed his plan. He would not confront Daniel openly, not yet. Revenge demanded patience. He opened a drawer, pulling out a USB drive labeled with his own initials. Inside it lay backups of everything Daniel had stolen, proof untouched and undeniable. Ethan whispered, "I'll let him build his castle, then I'll set it on fire." His voice carried no anger, only cold certainty. Outside, the first beams of sunlight pierced through dark clouds, flooding the office floor in pale gold. For Ethan, it was no dawn of peace. It was the beginning of his quiet war. The first year at Halberd Tech tasted like burnt coffee and hope, and Ethan wore both like armor. He stayed late, sketching models on scrap paper while the janitor whistled down the hall. Daniel would drop by with a grin and say, "We make monsters here, friend." Ethan laughed then, believing the word meant greatness, not greed. Sarah covered for him when deadlines crashed like surf, whispering, "Breathe, you've got this." He did more than breathe. He bled into spreadsheets and prototypes and pitches no one else dared deliver. When a pilot failed, he stood up in the room and said, "Let me fix it tonight." He did. And no one asked how many nights it took. The team clapped, and Daniel clapped loudest, and Ethan felt taller than the skyline. He called his mother and said, "I think I finally belong." She cried softly and told him to keep his heart soft and his spine steel. He wrote those words on a sticky note. He did not know who would test them. Memory cut to a rooftop bar where deals felt lighter than air. Daniel lifted a glass and said, "Tomorrow, we present as one voice." Ethan nodded because unity felt like oxygen. He showed slides on his tablet while city lights pulsed below, and Daniel whistled low. "You always find a clean line," Daniel said, and Ethan smiled. He did not notice the way Daniel's eyes mapped routes around him. Sarah texted, "Proud of you. Careful with the deck." He replied, "Locked and backed up." The night smelled like citrus and rain, and a promise he needed to believe. A siren wailed far off, a thin red thread pulling across the sky. Ethan said, "We get this right, we change everything." Daniel tapped the screen and said, "We will." The words fit like a handshake, but the grip was colder than he realized. Somewhere, a gull screamed, and Ethan mistook it for laughter. Weeks later, the praise never found Ethan's desk, but the overtime did. He counted empty cups instead of thanks. In the break room, Leo said, "You look like a man trading sleep for smoke." Ethan rubbed his eyes and said, "Smoke can signal fire." Leo frowned. "Or it hides it." The vending machine clicked, and its metal hum felt like a warning. Ethan scrolled through builds and changelogs and timelines that told one story with two names. He whispered, "It has my fingerprints." Leo said, "Then keep your hands clean." The words landed heavier than coffee. Sarah slipped in and paused, as if the room itself might accuse her. She said, "You should talk to Grace." Ethan nodded because he trusted the sound of her name. He pocketed the USB like a coin from a wishing well. He made no wish. He made a plan. Grace met Ethan in an empty conference room that held the soft quiet of old battles. She laid a legal pad between them and said, "Document everything." He nodded and breathed steadier. Grace watched him like a lighthouse watches storms. She said, "Anger burns fast. Proof burns slow and bright." He opened a folder and showed version histories that marched like soldiers. She traced dates with her pen and said, "Chain of custody matters." He said, "I kept backups before they were cool." She almost smiled. "Then you were wise before you were wounded." The silence that followed felt clean. Outside, clouds drifted, and a strip of sun cut across the carpet like a path. Grace said, "You can win this without losing yourself." Ethan answered, "I want both." She said, "Then pick patience over heat, and let the truth do the heavy lifting." Night returned, and with it, the discipline of a craftsman. Ethan built a timeline that clicked together like gears. He whispered, "No noise, only facts." He labeled each artifact and cross-checked every link until the story walked on its own. Leo called and said, "Need backup?" Ethan answered, "I need quiet." The city complied for once. He replayed Daniel's promises until they turned thin and brittle. He replayed Sarah's warning until it rang true. He heard Grace in the marrow of the room saying, "Let proof speak." The clock slid past midnight, but time felt like a tool, not an enemy. Ethan saved the file and backed it up twice. He said, "I will not scorch the earth. I will light the path." The words steadied his hands. The storm outside had not ended. Inside, his weather finally did. Ethan walked into the boardroom where Daniel held court. A crowd of managers gathered like disciples. Charts glowed on the projector, each one Ethan's design scrubbed clean of his name. Applause rolled like thunder, and Daniel bowed as if he had moved mountains. Ethan sat at the back, lips pressed thin, his pulse a drum in his ears. He whispered, "Keep clapping. The higher you rise, the harder you fall." Sarah glanced at him nervously, shifting in her seat, her guilt painted clearly across her face. Ethan tapped his pen against a notepad, every strike marking another wound carved deeper. Daniel's voice filled the room, smooth and practiced, dripping with false charm. "We built this together," he declared. Ethan nearly laughed at the hypocrisy. Rage surged, but he forced it into silence. His eyes burned, but his voice inside was steady. "Not long now. Truth has sharp teeth, and it's hungry." Later that evening, Ethan lingered in the office as the last light faded. The glow of city lights seeped through glass windows, his reflection fractured across them. Sarah entered quietly, carrying hesitation like a heavy coat. She whispered, "He'll ruin you if you keep pushing." Ethan turned sharply, eyes dark. "He already tried. Now it's my turn." Sarah sighed, her voice cracking. "I didn't think he'd go this far." Ethan stepped closer, his voice low and sharp. "Silence is louder than betrayal, Sarah. You chose his side the moment you stayed quiet." She flinched, torn between fear and regret. Ethan picked up his folder of evidence, the edges sharp in his grip. "Every lie has a weight," he said. "And his are about to collapse on him." Outside the storm returned, thunder shaking the glass, as if the sky itself approved of the war he had chosen. The next day Ethan found Leo in the break area, slouched with headphones tangled around his neck. Leo studied him carefully, noticing the fire in Ethan's eyes. "You look like a man about to walk into flames," Leo muttered. Ethan smirked faintly. "Sometimes flames are the only way to clear the field." Leo shook his head uneasy. "He's got allies, Ethan. You fight him, you fight all of them." Ethan leaned forward, voice steady. "Then let them all come. I'll still be standing when the dust clears." The hum of the coffee machine filled the silence as Sarah passed by, her eyes flickering with unease, but no words escaping. Leo whispered, "You're gambling your soul." Ethan straightened, determination etched in his face. "I'm not gambling. I'm collecting debts." His hand tightened on the USB drive in his pocket. The machine beeped, and it sounded like a warning bell. Daniel's confidence grew unchecked. In the cafeteria, he boasted to a group of colleagues, voice echoing against glass walls. "Management sees my vision. Soon, promotions will follow." Laughter erupted, each laugh another dagger in Ethan's back. Ethan sat alone at a corner table, listening, his tray untouched. His eyes traced Daniel's every movement, cataloging arrogance like a scientist observing a specimen. Sarah sat near Daniel, nodding weakly, though her shoulders stiffened at Ethan's gaze. Ethan whispered to himself. The louder his voice, the closer his fall. His fork scraped against the plate, like a blade being sharpened. The crowd cheered Daniel's words, blind to the storm brewing just beyond their sight. Ethan's silence was his shield, but inside vengeance tightened like a coil, ready to strike. That night, Ethan spread files across his apartment floor, pages scattered like battle maps. He spoke aloud, voice steady. "If lies build empires, truth brings them down." His hands moved quickly, connecting lines with precision, weaving a story that no one could deny. The sound of rain against glass became his rhythm, each drop a beat of determination. He paused, staring at a photo of the team from better days, Daniel's smile sharp and poisonous in hindsight. Ethan tore the photo cleanly, tossing Daniel's half into the trash. He whispered, "This ends with me." The clock struck midnight, its chime echoing in the quiet room. He leaned back, exhaustion pulling at his body, but resolve stronger than sleep. The war was no longer in his mind. It was etched on paper, on drives, and in his bones. Ethan was ready. The office was quiet, except for the hum of computers, as Ethan slipped into the records room. His pulse matched the flickering light above as he whispered, "This is where the truth hides." He sifted through folders, pulling out project logs Daniel had tampered with. Each file was a breadcrumb leading back to him. Ethan's breath grew steady as he photographed every page with his phone, storing pieces of a puzzle no one else wanted to see. A creak echoed in the hallway, and he froze, listening. Sarah's silhouette appeared in the doorway, her voice low. "You shouldn't be here." Ethan held her gaze, calm but cold. "Neither should lies. But here they are." She didn't step closer, only turned away, leaving him with silence heavy as stone. He pocketed the files and whispered, "Patience is power, and I have both." Outside, the city's neon glow bled against the window like a warning flare. Ethan sat across from Grace in a quiet cafe, the air thick with roasted coffee and whispered conversations. He laid down copies of the files, each page trembling with history. Grace adjusted her glasses, eyes sharp as she scanned them. "This is enough to shake him," she said, her tone controlled. Ethan leaned back, voice low. "I don't want to shake him. I want to end him." Grace frowned, warning etched in her expression. "Justice isn't revenge, Ethan. If you cross that line, you may never come back." Ethan's lips curved into a faint smile. "Maybe I don't want to." The words tasted bitter as they left his tongue, but they felt honest. Grace's hand touched his arm lightly. "Then remember, fire burns both ways." He pulled his arm back gently, staring into his coffee as steam curled like smoke from a battlefield. His silence said more than words. Later that night, Ethan returned home and pinned new documents to his board, red string stretching like veins across the wall. He muttered, "Every move he made I've tracked. He thinks he's clever, but he left footprints in wet cement." He traced one line with his finger, the timeline now clear. Leo called him, voice buzzing through the speaker. "Man, this is getting dangerous. You need to breathe." Ethan replied sharply, "Breathing is for survivors. I'm not surviving. I'm winning." He hung up before Leo could argue, the silence rushing back like a storm. His eyes locked on Daniel's, name scrawled across the center of the board, circled in black ink. Ethan whispered, "You've been playing chess with checkers pieces. It's my move now." The ticking clock above him counted down the seconds to a war Daniel didn't know had already begun. In the parking garage, Ethan waited, the concrete echoing every drop of water from the pipes above. Daniel's laughter carried down the ramp as he walked with two associates, voice booming. Ethan stepped from the shadows, eyes sharp. Daniel smirked, "Working late again? Or spying?" Ethan's reply was cold steel. "I don't spy. I remember." Daniel's smirk faltered, but only for a second. "Careful, Ethan. You sound paranoid," he said. Ethan stepped closer, the distance crackling with tension. "Paranoia is expecting betrayal. I'm past that." Daniel's eyes narrowed, a flash of recognition passing through them. His associates shifted uncomfortably, sensing the weight of the moment. Ethan walked away without another word, his silence louder than threats. Daniel turned, watching him vanish, and for the first time, his smile faded. At dawn, Ethan stood on his balcony overlooking the city, the skyline bleeding with orange light. He sipped bitter coffee, his eyes fixed on the horizon as if it carried answers. The city below bustled with life, but his war felt silent, hidden in boardrooms and files. He whispered, "This isn't about survival anymore. It's about balance." His phone buzzed with a message from Grace. "Stay sharp. Today may test you." He pocketed it and straightened his posture, the air crisp and cutting against his skin. He thought of Sarah's guilt, Leo's worry, Gracie's warnings, and Daniel's arrogance. They were all pieces of the same game. He exhaled slowly, whispering, "Patience is over. It's time to strike." The rising sun caught his face, painting half in gold, half in shadow, like a man split between justice and vengeance. Ethan sat in the darkened office, reviewing files one more time, when Sarah entered, her face pale as moonlight. She whispered, "You don't know the whole truth." Ethan's voice was sharp, "Then enlighten me." Her hands shook as she confessed, "Daniel isn't working alone. He has someone in management backing him." The words hit Ethan harder than the betrayal itself. "Who?" he demanded. She looked away, silent, her guilt and answer louder than words. His chest burned, not just from betrayal, but from the scope of the conspiracy. He realized the fight wasn't against one man, but a machine designed to bury him. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I wanted to tell you sooner, but I was afraid." Ethan's voice cut through her fear, steady and fierce. "Fear protects cowards. Truth protects the brave. Decide who you are." Her silence lingered, but Ethan knew the war had widened. The revelation gnawed at Ethan as he sat alone in his apartment, staring at the city skyline, glowing coldly in the distance. He whispered to himself, "This is bigger than him. I'm fighting ghosts in suits." His phone buzzed. It was Grace. Her calm voice carried steel. "If management is involved, then your evidence must be airtight. Loose ends will destroy you." Ethan pressed his forehead against the glass, watching headlights streak below like falling stars. He said quietly, "Then I'll tie every knot tight enough to strangle him." Grace replied, "Just don't strangle yourself in the process." Silence filled the line before Ethan muttered, "Justice doesn't come cheap." He ended the call, gripping his USB like a blade in disguise. The night felt colder than ever, yet the fire inside him raged hotter, refusing to die down. The next morning, Ethan caught Daniel in the lobby, his smile too wide, his handshake too firm. "Big day ahead," Daniel said with mock cheer. Ethan leaned close, his words sharp as glass. "You've built your empire on stolen bones, and I've been counting." Daniel chuckled softly, masking unease. "Careful, Ethan. Accusations without proof can bury you." Ethan's jaw tightened. "And what happens when proof buries you instead?" For a flicker of a moment, Daniel's mask cracked, his smirk faltering before snapping back in place. Colleagues passed by, unaware of the storm brewing just a breath away. Ethan's eyes never wavered, drilling into Daniel's. It was no longer a rivalry. It was a war written in silence and sharpened words. That afternoon, Ethan met Leo in the underground garage, tension coiling in the stale air. Leo's voice was low. "You're walking a razor's edge, man. If you slip, there's no coming back." Ethan leaned against a pillar, eyes burning. "The edge is where you see clearest." Leo rubbed his face, shaking his head. "Daniel has management on his side. You're outnumbered." Ethan's voice cut like ice. "I don't need numbers. I need truth." Leo looked at him with a mix of fear and loyalty. "Then you better hope truth is enough." The air vibrated with the weight of their words, each echo bouncing off the concrete like a warning bell. Ethan pushed off the pillar, his steps steady. "Hope is for the weak. I'll settle for certainty." His footsteps faded, leaving Leo alone with silence heavy as chains. That night, Ethan sat at his table, evidence spread before him like pieces of a weapon waiting to be forged. He whispered, "Tomorrow I strike." His mind replayed every betrayal, Daniel's smirk, Sarah's silence, management's shadow. He knew the battle would not just expose lies, but test his own soul. The clock ticked past midnight, the room alive with the glow of his laptop and the hum of determination. He whispered again, "No fear, no mercy." The rain outside hammered against the glass, a drumbeat matching his resolve. He saved his files, locked them away, and leaned back with fire in his eyes. The storm within, and the storm outside, had become one. The war was no longer brewing. It was here. The boardroom lights glared like interrogation lamps as Ethan entered, briefcase in hand. Daniel stood at the front, smiling with the arrogance of a king awaiting coronation. "Glad you could join us," Daniel said smoothly. Ethan set his case down, his gaze sharp as a blade. "I wouldn't miss your downfall," he replied. Murmurs rippled across the table as executives exchanged uneasy glances. Ethan opened the case and slid out folders, each page stamped with Daniel's theft. "These are my designs, my work, and his lies." The silence cracked like thunder. Daniel's smirk faltered, his eyes darting to management, searching for cover. Ethan leaned forward, his voice low but lethal. "The truth doesn't need applause. It only needs light." The files glowed under the fluorescence like weapons, and for the first time, Daniel's hands shook. Ethan's war had arrived, and he was ready to finish it. Daniel lunged verbally, his voice slick with desperation. "He's twisting data, manipulating context," he said, but his tone cracked at the edges. Ethan countered with precision, sliding digital records onto the projector. Version histories lit the wall like scars carved in time. "Every lie leaves a fingerprint," Ethan declared. Executives leaned closer, their eyes scanning dates and signatures. Daniel tried to laugh, but the sound was brittle, hollow. "You can't prove intent," he muttered. Grace stepped into the room, her calm voice cutting the air. "Intent is irrelevant. Evidence is irrefutable." Gasps rippled as she placed her affidavit beside Ethan's files. Daniel's mask slipped, panic bleeding through his polished demeanor. Ethan stared at him, voice steady as steel. "This is the end of your empire." The weight of the truth pressed heavy, and Daniel's crown began to crack. As the storm escalated, the enforcer, Marcus, shifted uneasily in his chair at the side. For weeks, he had carried Daniel's dirty orders without question. Ethan's voice pierced the silence. "Marcus, how many lies did you deliver for him?" Marcus froze, his eyes flickering between loyalty and conscience. Daniel barked, "Don't answer that." Marcus exhaled heavily, the weight of guilt crushing him. "Too many," he admitted. The room erupted in murmurs, Daniel's fury flashing across his face. He spat, "Traitor." Marcus stood, his voice trembling but resolute. "No, survivor." Ethan nodded slowly, his gaze locking on Marcus. "Truth has a way of freeing us all." For the first time, Daniel looked truly cornered, his army crumbling from within. Ethan's strategy had pierced deeper than files. He had cracked Daniel's shield. The walls of deceit were falling faster than Daniel could rebuild them. Daniel's desperation turned violent. He slammed his hand against the table, veins bulging. "You think this proves anything?" he shouted. His voice cracked, no longer smooth but jagged with fear. Ethan stood slowly, his calm presence filling the room. "It proves everything," he said. He reached into his briefcase, pulling out the final document, a signed approval Daniel had forged. Gasps broke through the tension as the signature glowed on screen. Grace's eyes locked on Daniel, her tone final. "Forgery is a crime." Daniel staggered back, his face pale, his mask shattered. Ethan leaned forward, his words cutting deeper than any blade. "You tried to bury me, Daniel. Instead, you buried yourself." The silence afterward was crushing, a silence that carried judgment heavier than chains. For the first time, Daniel had no words, only fear in his eyes. Security entered the boardroom, their footsteps echoing like a verdict. Daniel tried to protest, his voice trembling. "You can't do this to me." But his words fell flat, powerless against the tide. Ethan didn't move, only watched as the empire of lies collapsed before his eyes. Sarah stood near the doorway, tears running silently down her face. She whispered, "I'm sorry." Ethan's voice was calm, almost weary. "Sorry doesn't erase scars, but truth does." As Daniel was let out, his eyes met Ethan's, no longer smug, but hollow, defeated. The room was silent, the weight of justice settling over every corner. Ethan gathered his files slowly, his voice steady. "It's done." The storm inside him quieted at last, leaving only the steady hum of truth. For the first time in months, Ethan felt the heavy chain of betrayal lift. The war was over. The boardroom emptied slowly, leaving Ethan alone with the echo of silence. He stood at the head of the table, staring at the empty chair Daniel once claimed. His hands rested on the polished wood, the weight of victory heavy but hollow. Sarah lingered at the door, her voice trembling. "You won." Ethan's eyes didn't leave the chair as he replied, "No one wins in betrayal. We just survive it." Her gaze lowered, guilt still a shadow she couldn't shake. Ethan gathered his files, his shoulders straight though his heart carried scars. For the first time in months, he felt air in his lungs without the taste of poison. Yet in the quiet, he knew the cost had carved him deeply. The war was over, but peace felt fragile. He whispered to himself, "This isn't the end. It's the beginning of something I can't yet name." Later that night, Ethan sat on his balcony, the city lights blinking like tired stars. He held his coffee cup, steam rising into the chill. Grace joined him, her presence calm and steady. "You did what had to be done," she said, her tone neither proud nor judging. Ethan nodded slowly. "But I wonder what it cost me." Grace studied him, her silver-streaked hair catching the glow of the skyline. "It cost you innocence," she replied, "but it gave you strength." Ethan sipped the bitter coffee, his reflection shimmering faintly in the glass. "Strength feels heavy," he murmured. Grace placed a hand on his shoulder. "It always does. That's how you know it's real." The night hummed with quiet traffic below, but the silence between them was what healed. Ethan breathed deep, the storm inside finally softening to rain. The next morning, Ethan returned to the office, walking through the glass doors that once felt like prison bars. Colleagues glanced at him differently, some with respect, others with unease. Leo approached, hoodie slung carelessly, a grin breaking tension. "Guess the smoke finally cleared," he said. Ethan smirked faintly. "Only because we lit the fire ourselves." The two shared a look that carried both relief and exhaustion. Sarah passed by, her eyes red but resolute, and whispered, "Thank you for not letting him win." Ethan gave no reply, only a nod that carried forgiveness without words. The office hummed with its usual noise, but Ethan felt taller, no longer carrying the weight of doubt. For once the building didn't swallow him whole. It was his ground now, scarred but steady. Ethan stood in his apartment that evening, the board once cluttered with red strings now stripped clean. He pulled down the last note, folding it carefully before placing it in a drawer. His reflection in the dark window stared back, no longer broken but weathered and whole. He whispered, "The knife that stabs you can sharpen you too." The storm had passed, but its memory lingered like scars on skin. He sat at his desk, powering down his laptop for the first time without fear. Outside, the city pulsed, alive and indifferent. Ethan leaned back in his chair, eyes closing, the silence finally soothing instead of heavy. Tomorrow would be ordinary, and he found comfort in that. For the first time in months, ordinary felt extraordinary. The final dawn came clear, no storm clouds, only quiet sunlight. Ethan walked through the park, the grass wet with dew, his suit jacket slung casually over his arm. Children's laughter carried in the distance, a sound that no longer felt foreign. He stopped beneath an old oak tree, breathing deeply as the wind brushed his face. He whispered, "The past tried to bury me, but I chose to grow." His phone buzzed, but he ignored it, savoring the moment unchained from battles. For the first time, the war inside was silent, replaced with the hum of life around him. He turned toward the rising sun, eyes steady, step strong. Ethan had faced betrayal, survived fire, and walked out forged. His story didn't end in vengeance, it ended in freedom.